Hello everyone. So today we're going to be talking about the North and South American literature. And to begin, let's first know what's American literature. So American literature is a body of written works produced in the English language in the United States. For almost a century and a half, America was merely a group of colonies scattered along the eastern seaboard of the North American continent. Colonies from which a few hardy souls tentatively ventured westward. After a successful rebellion against the motherland, America became the United States, a nation. By the end of the 19th century, this nation extended southward to the Gulf of Mexico, northward to the 49th parallel, and westward to the Pacific. By the end of the 19th century, too, it had taken its place among the powers of the world, its fortunes so interrelated with those of other nations that inevitably it became involved in two world wars, and following these conflicts with the problems of Europe and Eastern Asia. Meanwhile, the rise of science and industry, as well as changes in the ways of thinking and feeling, wrought many modifications in people's lives. All these factors in the development of the United States molded the literature of the country. With that said, let's move forward to our first period, the 17th century. At first, American literature was naturally a colonial literature, written by authors who were Englishmen or British, focused on seeing America as a great land of economic promise. Writings in this period were mainly creations of biographies, treatises, voyage, and sermons. There was also an emphasis on the supposed separation of church and state within this period. Drama and fiction are rarely achieved at this point because it was dominantly prejudiced. An example of this is the Bay Psalm book, which was written in this period and is considered a body of bad but popular poetry. Anne Bradstreet was able to write and publish lyrics on the 10th muse lately sprung up in America. This is her book, which concerned her religion and ties to family. Most works in this period were written primarily in British fashion. Moving on to the 18th century, this period emphasized the notion that man is born totally depraved and could only attain virtue and salvation through God's grace. Most of it were written on Jonathan Edwards' philosophical treatises under the book The Freedom of Will, wherein he supported his claims by relating them to a complex metaphysical system and by reasoning brilliantly in clear and often beautiful prose. On the other hand, certain contributors to this period argued that the prevailing sense of commercialism has been overpowering religion with worldly attitudes. With this in action came the American Revolution, which emphasized differences that had been growing between American and British political concepts, and it has later progressed in time, bringing in the production of other literary forms. Used as a means in the Revolution was the creation of poetry such as Yankee Doodle, Nathan Hale, and the Epilogue, wherein heroes were intended to be celebrated in verses and songs. Most popular at this era was the American journalist and poet Philip Freneau, for he has written many revolutionary war satire that became strong propagandas in the movement. In the years forward, towards the close of the 18th century, both dramas and novels of some historical importance were produced. Poetry, drama, and novels progressed further in time since then for the North American literature. And now, let's move forward to another umbrella of the North and South American literature, which is the Canadian literature. Canadian literature is the body of written works produced primarily by Canadians, reflecting the country's dual origin and its official bilingualism. The literature of Canada can be split into two major divisions, the English and the French. The first writers of English in Canada were visitors. They are usually explorers, travelers, and British officers and their wives who recorded their impressions of British North America in charts, diaries, journals, and letters. These foundational documents of journeys and settlements presage the documentary tradition in Canadian literature in which geography, history, and arduous voyages of exploration and discovery represent the quest for a myth of origins and for a personal and national identity. The earliest documents were unadorned narratives of travel and exploration. Written in plain language, these accounts document heroic journeys to the vast, unknown west and north, and encounters with Inuit and other native people. As an example, explorer Samuel Herney wrote A Journey from Prince of Wales Fort in Hudson's Bay to the Northern Ocean, while another writer and explorer, Sir Alexander Mackenzie, wrote voyages from Montreal through the continent of North America to frozen and Pacific Oceans, all of which expressed their travels for fur trade. Most literary pieces from the origins of Canadian literature meant to narrate explorations along the seas. By the time this literature progressed to modern times, historical romances and poetry have flourished, especially that it was used as means of inspiration for recovery from the Great Depression, the prevalence of fascism, and World War II. Moving forward, novels came to existence, dominating against the prior genres. And then by the spike of 1960s and beyond, fiction has made a great deal of presence in Canadian literature. Written in either English or French, the bodies of work progressed certain creations which carried influences resemblant to the historical experiences of its people. And now that we're done with the Canadian literature, let's move forward to the South, wherein we will focus on Mexican literature. The dramatic history and political upheaval of Mexico has always played a major role in the fluctuation of Mexican writers. The original literature of Mexico dates back to the indigenous settlements of Mesoamerica. But with the arrival of the Spanish, merry Baroque writers could not help but capture a more localized view on Mexican culture. As a result, many writings include a hybrid and mixed tone of these two cultures. As we move forward in time, the political instability in the 19th century led to further changes in all forms of art in Mexico, and this included especially the writing. Once more, the Mexican Revolution changed the course of literature in Mexico as novels and plays of the civil conflict were written. This also led to such literary movements like the Estridentistas, which in English meant stridentism, and Los Contemporáneos, meaning the contemporaries, which were groups of individuals committed to the modernization of literature and Mexican culture in the first half of the 20th century. There are many Mexican writers and journalists that have played an important role in the history of Mexico, and as such, their writings have greatly contributed to the shaping and remolding of various thought processes within the masses at probably every level. Some of these well-known writers are those such as Alfonso Reyes Ochoa, Angeles Mastretta, Carlos Fuentes, Elena Garro, Elena Poniatowska, Guadalupe Teresa Amor Schmidt-Lane, Homero Arigis, Ignacio Padilla, Jorge Volpi, Jose Emilio Pacheco, Juan Rulfo, Laura Esquivel, Octavio Paz, Rosario Castellanos, and Salvador Elizondo, just to name a few. And then lastly, let's move on to the final part of the South American literature, which is the Chilean literature. Chile has a remarkable reputation in the world of literature. The South American nation has contributed some of the best writers and works of literature to the international literary scene, and as a result, Chile is considered a home to great writing and writers. From the early 20th century to contemporary authors, Chile has long been viewed as a literary stronghold. These famous writers are viewed as essential to the Chilean culture and to the literature of the world. And I'll be giving you the examples. Number one is Pablo Neruda. Pablo Neruda is perhaps Chile's most famous writer because Pablo has won the Nobel Prize for Literature in 1971. Just one accomplishment of his storied career as a poet. He is known for writing in a broad variety of styles, from erotic love poetry to political type of writing. Neruda contributed to Chilean life beyond his literature, serving as a politician and diplomat during the mid-20th century. Another one is Gabriela Mistral. Mistral is a poet, teacher, and feminist who won the Nobel Prize for Literature in 1945, and she was the first ever Latin American to do so. Her many volumes of poetry are considered vital to Chilean literature at large. She also wrote hundreds of essays and other literary works. Coming next is Isabel Allende. This Chilean American author won the National Literature Prize in Chile in 2010 and is famous for her many novels which have become extremely popular worldwide. Her style of magical realism appears in many of her works, including the famous The House of the Spirits. Her impact on Latin American literature and her popularity on a global level makes her a remarkable Chilean writer. And then lastly is Roberto Bolaño. Roberto Bolaño is a 21st century novelist and poet, and he was considered the best Chilean writer of his time. His novel 2666 is considered a masterpiece, and in 2008, the National Book Critics Circle Award for Fiction was awarded posthumously to Bolaño. His other works, including By Night in Chile, are essential to the Chilean literary canon. Bolaño continues the tradition of Chilean preeminence in the international literary scene. With all that is said, these are the totality of North and South American literature, with USA and Canada representing the North and Mexico and Chile representing the South. Thank you so much for listening to my blog, and again, I am Angelo David from BSc English 3, and I hope you loved this video and learned something from it, most importantly. Thank you so much. God bless everyone and stay safe.